Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Creating Textures. I'm Lori Langford, and I am so excited that you've joined me today. I'm a digital artist and photographer. I absolutely love to learn new things and to share them within my photography community. I also love to grow flowers and capture them out in the garden. That's me in my garden doing exactly what I love to do. I also love to give back to the photographic community and share some of my passions. And one of those is creating beautiful textures to add to my images. So today, what we're going to cover is how to shoot and capture your very own texture images, and then how to edit them using Photoshop and how to finalize them so that you can use them with your images. So we're going to jump into those two topics. Let's get started. So why would you want to use textures in your photography? Well, first is you may want to really tell a creative story. You may want your image to have a very artistic, painted look, something a little moody or dramatic, maybe something that's a city scene where you want to really enhance the feeling, the mood. You also may want to clean up a messy background. So I think that's the number one reason people tend to use textures is to clean up the background and then really emphasize the subject. You also may want to add detail or soften your image. So again, if you think about a street architecture scene, you may want to add some additional maybe grunge texture to it. If you think about an image of a beautiful barn out in a field, you may want to add additional roughness or give it more of a Western look. And you can do that through textures. And lastly, you can also use it to create a more painterly looking image. So something that looks very artistic and as if it was painted. So those are some reasons that I like to use textures. Now, you of course can purchase your own textures and buy them online, but you can also create them yourselves. So what I want to share with you is first how to capture texture images. So the light bulb here tells us you can shoot texture images anytime, anywhere with any camera. So even your cell phone, no matter where you are, you can grab some snapshots of texture. The great thing is what to capture. So think about brick walkways, water. You could do stone paths, natural stone, grasses, maybe a field of flowers, fabric, bokeh, leaves, rocks. The ideas are endless. The idea is you're taking an up close snapshot of whatever you see. You also want to think about colors because colors could also be used as a texture to add additional color or light. Now, the technical tips are if you're using your camera, a digital camera, you want to try to shoot at a higher f-stop. So typically you want to shoot at f8 or greater. That's if you want to get all the details. But if you want bokeh light, like in this background, these round circles are called bokeh. If you want that soft, dreamy look, then you could shoot at f4 or lower to get that softness. So just think about if you're wanting the details or if you're wanting the soft side of the image. But again, if you just have your cell phone, just grab some snapshots of whatever texture you find, and you can use that in your other images. Next, again, any camera is going to work. So the idea is just to build a file of textures over time that you can then convert using a program like Photoshop into a beautiful texture that you can use with any image. So here's some examples of my file of texture images. So it's a huge variety. Some of these are from when I was in Glacier National Park. This is actual rock on the side of the mountain. These are some brick areas that I found, some stone, some other brick. I also love to capture images using intentional camera movement. Now, I have several YouTube videos as well as information out on my website about shooting with intentional camera movement, but it's just where you move the camera to get that blurred look. Those can make great texture images. I also have some just snapshots of flowers in the garden, just kind of that general look. Think about brick walls. This image in the left corner was of a blue wall. So just think it's a really fun one to use for texture because I really like that color. Think about things that are patterned to where when you blur it, it's going to give you that gorgeous texture. Maybe just some concrete on the road. This is a metal grate. So just a wide variety of true kind of snapshots that I can use to create gorgeous textures. So how are we going to convert these images into a beautiful texture? So first, I recommend that you use Photoshop. So Photoshop is an easy tool where you can use blur filters, brushes, layers, all of those incredible tools. Now, if you're not familiar with Photoshop, most of the techniques that I'm going to show you today are really easy and are not advanced Photoshop skills. So stay tuned. I really think that even a beginner Photoshop user can follow along. Now, you can also use applications. So whether those apps are on your phone, maybe through an iPad or a tablet, applications are a fun way to add creative effects. So one app that I love to use is called iColorama. It allows you to create texture and paint. You can also use, there's a great app called Glaze, and it creates a glazed look of your image. There are also other programs that let you blur your image, so you might want to try some of those. A third option is the program called Topaz Studio. Topaz Studio is a program that you can get as a desktop application, and it has lots of blur tools, lots of creative brushes. It's meant for creative, artistic photography, and it's a lot of fun to use. So that's another option. Now, I can encourage you to try multiple styles on one image. You could just apply one blur filter, but the more you multiply it, the more beautiful your texture images can become. So that's my little light bulb tip over here. All right, so before we jump into editing, I am launching an incredible course on artistic editing of flowers. This is a signature online course that I've created, and I am offering it to you with a discount today. The discount code is flowers25 for $25 off. This is my first worldwide launch of this program, and it is all about artistic editing of flowers using Photoshop as the main tool. So you'll have a link in the thank you email, and you can also find all the information on my website. So I hope you'll consider joining me for that if you love artistic looks and love editing flowers. All right, so let's talk about editing. What we're going to do to our images are we're going to add blur filters, artistic filters, we're going to use brushes, and we are going to use the stylize feature. Now I'm going to take you straight into Photoshop in just a minute. These are some tips. So if you want to screenshot this, I would encourage you to take a quick snapshot. These are 4 critical things that you'll need to know in Photoshop to really take your texture images to that next level. First is when you're editing, it's always important to know how to make a stamped layer. You will see me use that in just a minute. These are the commands that you would want to use to make a stamped layer. Now, also for artistic textures in Photoshop, you have to change the image mode to 8-bit. And I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Now, the third component is brushes. So there is a website on adobe.com under products. You can look it up under Kyle, K-Y-L-E, brushes, and you can get hundreds of free brushes straight from Adobe and Photoshop. So be sure to save this page and that link so that you can take advantage of those free brushes. Also, if you are just getting into Photoshop, check out my YouTube channel. I have got lots of Photoshop videos. I love to edit using Photoshop, and I've got several videos on different creative tools. So check out Creative Photography with Lori straight on YouTube. I post free videos almost every single week. All right, are you guys ready to jump into Photoshop? I know I am. So let's jump over. I am going to go stop sharing my screen, jump into Photoshop, and we will get started with editing live. And I do want to tell you, I will check questions at the end of editing and answer some of the key ones. And then I will review all of the questions that come through, and I will be sending you a follow-up email right after this webinar. All right, let's jump over to Photoshop. Okay, so to get started, we are going to start over here. And let me stop share, and I'm going to share my screen because I don't think you could see that. So let's jump right over to Photoshop. All right, here we go. I think we are in there. I'm gonna move myself off the screen. Okay, so this is an image that I've already added a texture to, but we are going to start right here together with this first image. So you saw this one in my collection of texture images. So again, this was just a snapshot that I took when I was walking one day and brought it into Lightroom, and now I've brought it into Photoshop. So this is one where I only did 2 steps to get this gorgeous texture that I could use in another image. So let's get started together, and I'm going to walk you through these quick and easy steps for this image. Now, as I go through several edits with you today, I'm going to show you some more advanced techniques, but I want to start at the beginning, especially for anyone that is new to using Photoshop. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is Command or Control J to duplicate our layer. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm just going to come straight up to Filter, and I'm going to go to Blur. Now, under Blur, you have tons of options, and there are lots of options here that I love to use. I love to use Surface Blur. Box Blur is a great one, as well as Gaussian Blur. You can also do Motion Blur. So I'm going to show you several of those to give you an idea of how they can help you create a texture. So for this image, let's just start with Box Blur. Now, Box Blur is going to give you this really interesting, almost like lines. You can see these lines, which really help you create that texture look. So what we want to do is blur it just enough, but I still want to leave some of this gorgeous color and detail. So I'm going to start there at about 108 pixels. You'll have to decide based on your image what's going to work. Now we're going to click OK, and that's our starting point. Now, if you wanted, you could reduce the opacity if you wanted to bring out more detail, but I'm going to leave it right there. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and duplicate this layer again. So Command or Control J. Now we can come up and we could add another blur if we wanted. So we could come down and do a Gaussian blur, even a surface blur. Surface blur is a really fun one. It definitely gives a very soft effect, which you can see here. It's really soft. I'm going to cancel that one. Let's go back and try a Gaussian blur. And I'm just going to bring it down. Just keep bringing it up soft. So Gaussian blur is going to really soften as well. So you can just kind of see how it's adding that. Now, another thing that we can do is I'm going to scroll out. You could do Command or Control T to transform. So just going to, enlarge this layer. And then we could even lower the opacity. And you can see that is making it even more blurry and just kind of interesting. So all we've done, we haven't done any masking. We've just used our filter blur techniques. Now you could stop here and you could save this file. This is a beautiful, soft background that you can use. But for textures, I do like to have a little grain, a little true texture to it. So what we want to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer again, Command or Control J, and I'm going to go up to Image mode. And we need to make sure it's on 8 bits. Now, this does not destruct your image. It doesn't impact your pixel size. All this does is really allow you to use the artistic filters in Photoshop. Now, there's some other technical terms to the bits of an image. We're not going to get into that today. I promise it does not matter for the work that we're doing to make a texture file. So again, you want to go to Image, Mode, and then 8 bits. Now that we're in 8 bits, we can go to Filter, and we can come down to Texture. And this is where I'm going to select the texturizer. The texturizer will be your favorite friend. So under texturizer, you have several textures available. I love the canvas. Look how gorgeous that is. That's the look that I would want with this texture. I want it to look like I painted it. So you've got the option where you can increase kind of the relief, which is how large the texture is. You can also increase the scaling. So if you want it really heavy. There's light. I don't find that this makes a big difference, so I don't usually change it. Now, under texture, you also have sandstone. That would also be a gorgeous texture. So let's click OK and come back. And if I zoom in, you can see how we've created that beautiful. Now it's at 50% opacity, so I'm going to increase that opacity so we can see all that beautiful texture. So this now would be a file that I could export and save as a blue stone texture and have it added to my file. So you could export it just like this. You could also go back and add additional blur if you wanted to. So we could take this layer and go to Filter, Blur, and we could do let's do a surface blur. And let's say we wanted it to be even softer. You could just continue to blur this to where you have that just magical, soft looking image. So you have so many options as you work through and edit these. So that's the first one. That's just a really basic step, but now you've got this texture that you can use. All right, I'm going to check to see if I have any questions about that, and I don't think I see any just yet, so we're going to keep going. All right, so next is we have this is an image that I shot using intentional camera movement. So I shot it with this, just swipe of my camera to get this beautiful texture and colors. So this is an image that I wanted to do a couple different blurs. So the first blur is just what we did before. This blur is going up to Filter, Blur, and it's doing a Gaussian blur. And so I did a Gaussian blur on it just to get started. So that was my first step. My second step is I actually duplicated that and added another Gaussian blur. So you can sometimes do them over and over to get the look that you want. Now I decided that the bottom part of this image was really dark. So I went in and did a levels adjustment. So don't forget, when you're creating your own textures, you can actually make adjustments as you go. So if you want to brighten your image, you can. If you want to do a levels adjustment, you can see I moved and opened up the blacks. I could also make the image brighter. I can move kind of the middle over if I want to make it darker. So you can make adjustments to your textures just like you would any image. So don't forget that. All right, next, I went and did a really fun technique. And if you look close, you're going to see all this gorgeous texture that I did. So before we do that, what I'm going to do is I'll turn that off and I'm going to show you the next step. All right, so we've done our first 2 steps just like we did in our first image today. We added just our blurs. Then we did some adjustments to the image. So now I want to add those creative textures. So what I need to do is create that stamped layer that I was telling you about earlier. So we're going to do Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. Again, that's Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. That's giving us a new fresh layer. If you look right here under layer 2, you will see we've got a fresh layer. So we're not flattening our image. We basically have a new layer that has combined everything that we've done below. Now with this layer, I'm going to go up to filter. And before I do that though, I need to check my mode. So this image is already at 8 bits. We're good to go. If your image is not at 8 bits, you will not see the fun texture filters. So be sure you check out and make sure that 8 bits. Okay, so we're going to go back to texture, but this time I want to try something else. So let's come over and we're going to start with our artistic options. So artistic filter, again, you will not see this if you're not in 8-bit mode. So I want to reiterate that a couple more times because it is tricky. And so under artistic, I want to come down and try a couple of these. Let's start with pastels. So it's going to bring up our menu. And what we're going to do is under this menu, you are going to see you have all of these just amazing, fun options. Now you can slide your view so that you can see more of your image. Now you have a sponge option where you can get this kind of sponge look. You have a smudge stick. You have watercolor. I mean, just so many options under this example. So you also have brush strokes. You can look at those. You have distort, which has some options. You have texture. So just a whole lot of options. For this image, I really liked rough pastels. And so under that, you've got your stroke length, your stroke detail. You also have your texture. So you could do burlap. I'm going to go show you what burlap looks like. It's a little bit heavier than our canvas. So I'm going to keep this one on canvas. And I'm going to keep the scaling and the relief. So that's making it really small. Let's make it really large so that you guys can see it. And our scaling. I want to make it really big so you can see all that detail. We're going to do our stroke detail high. All right, I'm going to click OK. And now we'll go back and see what it did to our image. So you can see all of that detail. Now it's also distorted our image just a little bit. So I'm just going to bring down that opacity. And if you decide you don't like it, you could always go back a step. So I'm going to go back to our history and I'm going to go back because I felt like it didn't make the image look the way I wanted it. So let's go back to artistic. Let's go to rough pastels. And I think what I'm going to do is bring the relief and the scaling down and the stroke detail down. So sometimes if you get distortions, like right here, you want to just bring it down until those kind of disappear. So we're going to just keep it a lot lower. And let's go down to sandstone. We could also try some other options. So if you wanted to do under sketch, water paper is another beautiful one. So let me show you this one. I love this for texture, doing water paper. For this one, you can modify your brightness and you can also change the fiber length. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Ooh, that's interesting. So let's get that brightness turned up and it's processing. Sometimes it can be a little bit slow. You don't have to wait for it to process. You can click OK at any point and it's going to apply that water paper look. So let's see what that did. Oh, I think that's really, really pretty. All right. So again, for this one, we have just added, we haven't done any masking. We've just added these techniques. Now, if you don't like the white at the top, what you can do is Command J, duplicate your layer. On that new layer, you can do Command or Control T, and we can stretch it out, kind of bring that up. and then click enter. And then from here, you can reduce your opacity. Now we can click Command T again. I'm just going to stretch this over, kind of stretch it out. And then let's bring up the opacity. There we go. So that's just bringing some of those green tones into our texture. So what I like to do is try different things. You can always turn parts of it off. And if you don't like it, you can save this version. You could save this version. You could continue to work on it as you go. So lots of options here. All right. I'm going to show you how I use that texture in this image. So this is an image that I thought was fine the way it was, but I thought it'd be really pretty to bring in some additional texture to give it a very artistic, kind of dreamy look. And so when I created this texture, I thought this is the perfect image. So the first thing I did was duplicate my background layer so that I have a fresh layer to work with and so that my background is not damaged. I like to do that. It's just a best practice that I learned a long time ago. So duplicate your background layer. Now, the next thing that I did is I took this texture, I had it here in Photoshop, I grabbed the Move tool, and I'm just going to move it on top of my texture layer. And it's going to tell me that the depth map is a little bit different. That's okay. That's just those 8-bit versus 16-bit. It's not going to make a difference. All right, so I've overlaid my texture. You can see it right here. But I can move it because that texture file is a lot bigger. It's different shaped than my image. So let's go ahead and just move this around. I may stretch it, kind of come in with that and play with it, play with the light, click enter. So remember that you can stretch your layer, you can adjust it any way you want once you bring it on top of your flower. All right, now what we want to do next is you can change your opacity. So at 100%, there's our texture. We are going to lower that opacity so that we can see our original image. Now, the next step is going to be using a mask. So if you're new to masking, you may want to watch some additional videos about it, but I'm going to walk you through it, and it's really, really pretty simple once you get the hang of it. So we're going to come down to the box with the mask, click that mask. It's going to give you a white box. So what we need is black. So you want to make sure your paint over here is black. You want to grab a soft brush. You can change your brush size and style right up there. I want a soft round brush. And then I like to do my opacity. I'm going to start at about 40–50%. Okay. And what we want to do is come in with a small brush. I'm going to zoom in for you guys. And we want to just mask some of that texture off. Now, I like to start at 50%, and I'm just going to gently remove. I don't want it to look like I added, mask off the texture. I want it to be very natural. So I'm going to share with you next some of my tips for this. So my first step is going to be just to slowly kind of mask and bring out the details where I want them. So I'm just coming in just real lightly, bringing out a little bit of the details. Now, once you've done that, you can go up and lower your opacity to like 20%. I'm going to flip it now to white. White is going to reveal our mask below. And I like to just go back over it to kind of blend the edges, just to blend it all together. That is one of my tips. Then you can flip it back to black and increase your opacity, maybe about 70–80%. And on the key parts of your subject, you can just bring back parts of the detail, just very subtle, just to really, enhance those keep the subject really solid. So I like to just bring back just a little bit. Now, if you go over the edges, as I just did, you can grab your eraser and come right in there and erase that off. So I'm going to erase those little edges. Just make sure that's nice and clean. I'm going to check all around my image. And there we go. So that is adding that beautiful texture just to give it, this was before and this is after. So it's brightened it up. It's made it kind of look like it's raining. I just think it's kind of fun to do and really simple. Now, if you have a file of textures, what I like to do is when I'm editing an image, and if I decide that I really want to add texture, I just go to my texture file and look for a texture that's going to match the colors, the light, and the actual texture that I want to bring into the image. So in this example, I really needed something that was green, that kind of looked like grass, that added some light and some detail. All right, so I want to give you a couple more examples before we wrap up today. I have some really fun ones. So this was that granite block that I captured when I was in Glacier National Park. So I duplicated the background layer. I adjusted the image to black and white. So again, one of my great tips is don't forget that you can alter the colors, you can alter the darkness, the brightness of your textures. You don't have to just blur them. You can actually make them black and white. Now, the benefit of a black and white texture is that when you overlay it, you can overlay it just with the texture, not the color. So that's a great way to be able to use a texture on any single image. So the next thing I did is I added texture using the mosaic tiles. So let's do that together real quick. I'm going to go back a step where I converted it to black and white. Now I'm going to do our Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. That is going to give us that stamped layer. Now I'm going to go to image mode. It's on 8 bits. We are good to go. So now I'm going to go to Filter, Artistic. And what I want to do here is I want to find our mosaic. So I'm just going to select, let's go to Paint. So if you ever don't know where one of these is, I just kind of start looking for them. So under brush strokes, let's see, maybe it's under stylize. No, it's not there. Let's see, where is, there's sponge. Let's look under texture, mosaic tiles. So there we go. Look at that. How interesting is that? And you can make it really small. You can also make the grout really small, and you can even lighten it. So you can see what that's doing. This would be a great texture to add to a city scene or a street, a documentary, something like that, where you just want a little bit of kind of a real heaviness to your image. Now, don't forget, when you apply this texture, you can apply it in a very low opacity and at a very, you can change your blend mode. So you could do overlay, and it's just going to give it this textured look. So I think any type of rocks can be really fun to capture and use as texture. All right, this is one that I really had fun using, and this was using motion blur and a painted filter. So let's jump down, and I'm going to show you a couple tips that I did for this one. So first is I duplicated the layer and I applied a pixelate filter. So if we go to filter and we go to pixelate, you can do any of these options. So these are really fun to do. So let me go to my history, and I am going to, I don't think, I didn't write down exactly which pixelate I did, but let's go ahead and try one together and see what happens. So we're going to go to Filter, Pixelate, and you can try, I think I chose Mosaic. Yeah, you can keep your cell size really small. So that's one that you can do. You can see how it's making it that mosaic, that kind of pixeled look. So let's cancel out of that one. Go to filter. We want to go to pixelate, and let's try pointilize. And this one's going to give you this kind of look at this. It's just so fun. So this is a totally different one. Let's click OK, and look what it's done to your image. Now we could reduce that opacity. We could keep it up. So that's a fun one. I'm going to undo that real quick. Let's undo that. And now let's go back to filter, pixelate, and I am going to try. This one is the crystallize. I think that's the one that I had used. So I'm just going to bring that cell size up a little bit, click OK, and look what it's done to my image. I just think that's so fun. So what I did next is I actually duplicated it, and I went ahead and did that transform option. So Command T, and I just kind of increased it. You could increase it any way that you want. You could also kind of make it smaller, make it bigger, whatever you want to do there. You can also bring down that opacity. So now we're getting even more of that kind of fun look. Now, the next thing that I did to this image, so I'm going to take us back to where I did pixelate. I made my copy. So this is where I did the blur filter. So once I got to this step, you could stop right here and export this. But I went up to filter, I went to blur, and I did a motion blur. So motion blur, you can make your slide, but you can see how it's now giving us that softness. So click OK, and now we've got this part of the image. Now, the next thing I did is I wanted to paint on this. So I want to show you how to use the brushes. So when you load the brushes, they're going to come into your brush panel. And if your brush panel isn't visible, you can go to Windows and just check brushes. So if you uncheck it, it's gone. Window brushes, and that brush panel will pop up. Now, under the brushes, I have a set of, let's see, I think I want the Impressionism, and there's the Cezanne. So this is after the artist, impressionistic artist. So what I'm going to do is use my dropper. I'm going to select a color. So I'm going to select the peach color. I'm going to go to brush. I've got the Cezanne 2 selected, and I want my opacity of my brush to be about 50%. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop in. Now you can see it's popping in over the green, a lot of this peach color. Just going to pop this around, and you can just go wherever you want with it. And I like to do it about 50% so that I can see where I'm adding it. I'm wanting to add a little bit of pink to the green areas. I'm just going to come in here and go over it. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity. So I'm just bringing that down a little bit. Now pop it in some other parts. Now we can also change our blend mode. So we could make it soft light where you can barely see it in there. You could do hard light for a dark effect. You could do overlay. That's if you really want a strong. Screen is going to be much softer. You can also do overlay. And let's see, another one that I like would be just to do, under normal. Now, if there's a part that you don't like, you can always go to the erase and you can take off some of that that you added. But I just wanted to give it a little bit more of that kind of pink tone. Now from here, you could go and add more texture like we did before. You could also keep the image as is. I'm going to duplicate the layer, and let's keep that down. I want to keep that blur down. I'm going to actually go back to this layer, and I'm going to go up to filter, blur, and I'm going to add a Gaussian blur. And I just want to add a little bit of blur to it. So I'm going to click OK. And it's really soft. So I barely added any of that blur, but you could continue to add to this texture. And I think this would be beautiful added behind another maybe flower image or a type of garden scene. And you could continue again to make it really blurry if you wanted. All right. I had a question about getting the color. And what I want to encourage you is that it's right here under the eyedropper. And you just want to select whatever color you want. You'll see that color right here. Then you'll grab your brush and you can just paint. So we could go and also add some yellow. So if you wanted to kind of make your own mosaic with all the colors, you could also match the color that's in your actual image that you're going to add the texture to. So keep that in mind as well. All right, are you guys ready for one more? So I don't think we're going to get to this little bird image today, but I wanted to show you, let's go back a couple steps. So this was the original image, and I liked it okay, but I thought it would be really fun to add some texture to this. So what I did is I actually used the original image and added a ton of texture to it to create this overlay. So sometimes you can just use your original image and apply the texture and then mask off where your subject is located. All right, I have one final one to show you today. I know your head might be spinning if you're not used to Photoshop. If you are used to Photoshop, I hope you've learned some fun things today. This one I thought just turned out really beautifully. So I love to take pictures of fields of flowers because they make for just fantastic texture images. So for this one, I started with duplicating my background layer and I added a motion blur. So if we go up to filter, blur, we can do a motion blur. And I did it at about that kind of 50% range, the 237 pixels. All right, so we've got our blur. And then on top of that, I went and I duplicated it. And I added another motion blur. And I reduced it to 74%. So you'll see if I increase it, that is a big blur. So if we go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, or we could go to filter, blur, motion blur. Either one will work. So what I've done is I blurred it a whole lot, but then I took that opacity down to bring back some of the details. So I'm wanting it right around that 70%. So now we have two blur layers combined together. Next, I'm going to come in and apply a third one. So if we take this all the way up, you can see again, it is blurred. But I'm going to bring that down to about that 70%. Now, what I'm liking with this is how the grass blades are almost looking like rain. So as I'm duplicating, I'm able to get those marks to be more prevalent in the texture. And then the last step, this one is down to 12%. So if I go all the way up, again, it was a really, really soft blur. And then I just layered it to get more of those kind of rain drops. So let me show you the image that I added this texture to. So this is the image before. And while I'd already edited this image, I added a painterly look to this image. So this is an image that I teach in my artistic Photoshop editing course. So this image was not this pretty to start with. I cleaned up the blemishes. I added some artistic painting to the petals just to really give it that artistic look. Now I want to come in and apply a texture to it to give it, it's such a green background against the blue. I want to soften that. And I think that texture we just created will do it. So what I did is I went back to this texture. I grabbed my move tool I'm going to move it on top of this image. And it's going to process. And for some reason, it is clipping this. So let me get that. Let's undo that together. So let's duplicate this background. There we go. We're going to ignore those other things. Let's do this together again. So we're going to grab the move tool, come back over, and we're going to drop that on top. And we need to make sure our opacity is at 100% so that we can see it. There we go. Now, if it comes over and it's off, you just do Command or Control T, which is transform, to stretch it out. Now I'm going to stretch it a little bit further because I just want all that beautiful softness in my image. So you can just scroll out. There we go. Click Enter. And now we've got this beautiful transformed layer. Now what I'm going to do is just reduce the opacity. Well, let's zoom in so we can see it. I think that is just adding a little bit of blue to our image, a little bit of soft light. Now all we have to do is add our mask, come in with our brush. We want to make sure we're using a soft round, and I'm going to start at probably about 40%. And I'm going to make that brush smaller and just come in and go around the edges, really soft. Continue to use my mask to bring out the details in my flower. And then what I'm going to do once I get these edges, so I'm going to bring all that back. Remember, we're going to flip it to the white. We're going to take it down to about 10%. I'm going to enlarge, and I'm just going to go around those edges to just soften them so that it's not such a harsh difference between your image and your texture. Then I'm going to take it back to black. I'm going to take it almost to 100%. Let's make the brush small. And in the center, I'm going to bring back almost 100% of the detail of my flower. So you want to mask really soft on the edges and then bring out your center. So now we've got this beautiful flower that we edited, or I edited previously, in a very artistic way. And we've gone in and added this beautiful background to it. I think it really matches the tone of the image and the mood that I was trying to create. And it reduces that kind of harsh green of the background. So I think it's telling a story. I think it's also really enhancing our flower versus being like, ooh, that's a lot of bright green. So those are some reasons that I would apply and create a texture. So I absolutely love this blue texture. This is one that I think after this webinar, I'm going to make several versions of it. I'm going to do different things to it, apply some different techniques, and save all the versions so that I'll have it to use in future images. I think we've got time for one more edit. So let's jump back to an image we've looked at before. So this is the image that we worked on before, and I think I want to apply it to this beautiful butterfly image. This will be a fun one to enhance. So this is the image pretty much straight out of camera. Now I did start cleaning up the image, and I used the remove tool to just clean up that white blob. So that is one of the tips that you will learn in my artistic creative flower editing, is we cover a lot about how to remove distractions. So for this image, I just used the remove tool to get rid of that blob. So now let's come over to our texture that we created. Let's find that one. There it is. I'm going to grab the move tool, and I'm just going to slide this on top of our butterfly image. Just say yes here. It's going to tell us that the image is a little bit of a different bitmap zone, but that's okay. Command T to transform. We're going to drag this over, click enter. Now we want to reduce the opacity because there it is at 100%. We want to reduce this down and maybe right there about 20%. That just gives it such an artistic look. Now the second thing that you can do is we can actually use the blend modes, and I'm going to come down and use soft light. Now let's take our opacity back up just a little bit. And oh, I just love that. I think it gives it such an artistic kind of mosaic look. Really, really beautiful. So now that we've got that on there, we're using soft light. We could then continue to make our final edits to this image. So I'm going to do a stamped layer, Command Option Shift and the letter E. So now I've got a nice clean layer. I'm going to come up to Filter, Texture, and I want to add just a little bit of final texture to this image. Now I want to use Canvas, and I want the scaling to be really tiny. Look at that. How beautiful. Now I would encourage you to make any edits to your image before you add your texturizer. So for example, if I wanted to brighten the butterfly, I'm going to come down and do just a brightness contrast. I'm just going to kind of brighten the overall. Let's go ahead and invert that mask. I'm going to grab my brush, and on black, I'm just going to bring out, actually we need to be on white, bring out some brightness in our butterfly. Yeah, just kind of popping some brightness around this area, bringing that to life. Just a little bit there to really emphasize that guy. All right, so now that I've done that, I've got that brightness contrast. Now I'm going to do my stamped layer, Command Option Shift and the letter E. And then we'll go up to Filter, Texture, Texturizer. And again, I want to apply that really soft. So I'm going to reduce the scale of my texture. I want it to look like a painting. Click OK. And it's just giving us that final bit of texture that's going to really make it look like a painting. Now for this image, I would also do a crop. We've got a little bit of some kind of color lines coming over, and I probably would crop it over to the rule of thirds, make it almost a square. So that's on that rule of thirds line. And I think that's just going to really make that butterfly stand out. I could also keep the full size image, but I thought it might be pretty just to have it sweeping up here. All this gorgeous color and detail that we added just really makes it look like a painting. So if you like that type of photography, I think adding these textures can be really, really beautiful. So we're going to let that crop process. All right. There is our final image for this one. Well, that was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed learning about textures, creating your own through shooting and then editing them with a program like Photoshop. There are hundreds of ways to edit and make your own textures, whether you use Photoshop or another application. I think the idea is just to get out there, and when you see something, capture it with your camera and then play around with it in an editing program. It is so much fun and rewarding and can help you create just a beautiful artistic image. So thanks again. You will receive a thank you email from me in just a little while with a link to the recording so that you can watch this again and slow down the editing if you want to. You will also receive some notes, and I will include any tips that have come across in the comments from this webinar. Last but not least, don't forget your coupon, Flowers25, if you'd like to join my self-study online course, Artistic Editing of Flowers. If you love flower photography, if you want to learn how to create a painted, beautiful flower image, this is the course for you. It's my signature program, easy 3 steps. It has over 15 videos to walk you through, and you have access to it for a lifetime. So enjoy. I hope that you will tag me in some of your texture images and connect, email, reach out to me anytime. Thanks so much, everybody. Stay well and happy editing.